Hymns can be subjective depending on who's listening to them. Someone may think that a particular hymn is beautifully written, and someone else may feel that it's dreadful. Choosing hymns for worship is a minefield. Will the congregation know the hymn? Will they have a go at it if they don't? Will they find some meaning for them in the words? It's the eternal struggle to try to fit the hymns to the theme of the day and come out the other side without someone complaining because they didn't like that hymn. Sometimes, if I'm being totally honest, I will choose hymns that may not always seem at first glance to fit the theme, but rather offer the congregation a good sing. I make no apologies for that, because I find that if you only pick the hymns that fit the theme, they're not always that great a sing, and people often think of the hymn tunes as being just as important as the words. At the moment, it's even more difficult for us because we're not able to be in church and we're unable to sing together, and so we're often restricted in our online worship to choosing hymns from YouTube. We're even more restricted by finding hymns from YouTube that are not prefaced by adverts, some of which are not exactly what you would expect to find in an act of worship, to be honest. But once in a while, there is a hymn which splits me down the middle, and today is one of those days. Because as I read through the scripture that is assigned to today, the hymn that came immediately to mind was, "Will you come and follow me?" Now, the words to the hymn I find are challenging, whilst at the same time they're encouraging. But if I'm being totally honest again, I really don't like the musical setting to it. Now, you may agree or disagree, and at the end of the service you can make your own decision, because I'm going to be playing it in our playlist today. But why tell you all about the choice of music for today? Well, it's because it helps us to consider some of the themes that this gospel passage speaks about. John is detailing the calling of two of the first disciples, Philip and Nathanael. And before you start shouting at the screen and saying there wasn't a disciple called Nathanael, he was referred to in another way in the other three Gospels as Bartholomew. I'm going to stick to Nathanael today. Philip and Nathanael were friends, and so the beginning of this scripture is something that any of us would find very natural. One friend seeking out another to share exciting news with them. Of course, it's all very formal here, but you can almost imagine how the conversation went. "Hey, Nathanael, we found him." "Who?" "The promised one. He comes from that town Nazareth." "Phil, what are you talking about? Nazareth? Really? You're having a laugh, Phil." "Buddy, if you don't believe me, come and see for yourself." By this point, the scene has been set, and the challenge now is for Nathanael to go and see if it's all true. As Jesus and Nathanael meet, the beginning of the encounter is full of symbolic references which alludes to the fact that we see acknowledged when Nathanael identifies Jesus as Son of God. First, we see that Jesus has already seen Nathanael and was able to identify him. And that demonstrates that Jesus is the Good Shepherd who knows his flock. The references to Israel and the honour of that title, coupled with the reference to the fig tree, which is referred to in a variety of places in both the New and the Old Testament, refer to the stability of the land. And also that there are traditions of rabbis teaching under fig trees, very apt for the work that Nathanael was being called to do as a disciple of Jesus. Then finally, we see Jesus' reference to Jacob's ladder, all the way back in the book of Genesis, where God had promised to bring peace and prosperity to the land. And this all took place at Bethel, which was known as the house of God. And here we see in Jesus' reference to this that he's in communion with heaven at all times, and that the angels were now creating the link between heaven and earth through the very person of Christ. As John explained at the very beginning of this, the first chapter of his gospel, the Word became flesh and lived among us. And what at first glance seems to be quite a straightforward piece of scripture is in reality not simply a story about the calling of two disciples, but rather an important initial part of the Messiah narrative that John unfolds for us through his gospel. Each of Jesus' encounters with those he called to become one of the 12 disciples teaches us a little about not only the character of Christ, but also something about the nature of humanity. Each calling has a power to speak into our own experiences of faith and perhaps even other aspects of our lives. Nathanael's encounter began through his friend Philip. An innocent conversation between them ended up with life-changing consequences, but even more so, reveals an aspect of the Messiah which we might not have previously considered. And that is the nature of discipleship. It challenges us into a new and deeper relationship with Christ. It makes us stop and consider, often in our own limited ability, the awesome power of God. The words that Jesus used, the way that he wove the history of Israel into a simple, symbolically packed encounter with someone that he had just met, and the resultant realization and agreement from Nathanael to follow, should make us stop and think. Will you come and follow me if I but call your name? That's how the hymn starts. But it's also the way that many encounters with Christ begin as well. It's at that first moment that we have the choice to say yes or no, to allow the encounter to continue and explore what it means to follow Christ in our lives. Of course, the song continues to challenge us to become reshaped, transformed, and understand a little of what it means to be Christian. But the song echoes the actions that we take. It mirrors the lives that are recorded in the Gospels and beyond. They remind us that the initial yes is just that, the beginning. And as we develop our faith, we grow closer to Christ day by day. The song ends, "Thus I'll move and live and grow in you, in me." Discipleship is a lifelong adventure, and just as with all life, there will be highs and lows. We will continue to develop through them all. In some ways, we may simply think that this decision that we make is just for us, but each of us affects the world around us. Our actions, our conversations, even the way we behave reflect not only our character, but also on our faith and how it's perceived by others. This fact alone should, before we act, challenge us to ask these questions. If I do this, if I say that, who does it help? Who does it benefit? And possibly more seriously, who does it damage? Simply asking these things should give us pause for thought before doing something which is not Christ-like. But the other side of that coin is that through our positive actions, we do exhibit those Christ-like qualities in our lives. These are the actions which, whilst we need to clearly remember the words of Christ from Matthew's Gospel, "Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven," are the ones that clearly tell the world that we want to make a positive contribution through the grace and love that we have received through Christ. The Gospel this morning reminds us that it may take only a moment to say yes and agree to follow Christ, but it will take us a lifetime, probably longer, to comprehend the vastness of that answer. The disciples followed Christ through crucifixion and shared their experiences so that we make the choice for ourselves. As we see in Scripture, following does not change many of the experiences that we will have, but what it does do is change the way in which we react and cope with them, as we know that we walk with God and that He will always be by our side, strengthening, encouraging, and even comforting us as the need arises. Will you come and follow me if I but call your name? In 2021, it takes courage to answer yes, but that yes also brings us so many blessings. Today, what is your answer?